Hello, I am Lee Fromberger with American Security Mortgage, and this is a very special Zoom interview. I've got two very great, wonderful people with me today. I've got Matt Curran with True Footage Appraisals, and then I also have Scott Jones, who's with American Security Mortgage. Scott is our internal appraisal expert. So if there's a problem or issues with appraisals, we all go running to Scott. He's typically the one that reviews appraisals and helps settle indifferences. But the purpose of this Zoom interview today is this is not a 101 type question deal. This is really time that I wanted to spend with an appraiser to dive further into the mechanics of an appraisal, to better understand a lot of the things that an appraiser goes through when they put together an appraisal. That's, I would say, the best way to put it, kind of at a 300 level, not really a 101 level. So we're going to have a lot of different things that we talk about, but these are going to be some deeper questions that help you as a real estate individual agent better understand an appraisal and how it's all put together. So Matt, I really appreciate you doing this, man. It means a lot. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with just a 101 question. In your words, what is an appraisal?
Yeah, I mean, basically in a nutshell, an appraisal is just it's an opinion of value provided by a licensed professional appraiser. Um, it's if we're talking market value, which is the bulk of all appraisals that especially you guys deal with on the mortgage side. We're looking at what is the most probable price that a property will bring that's also supported by market data. We're
Okay.
not pulling it out of thin air. We're not making it up. We have to be able to support these prices with actual transactions, actual data from public sources.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm gonna get right into some of the deeper level stuff. One of the things that we experience a lot of times is everybody wants to point out the fact that there were multiple offers, but there were multiple offers and the property didn't appraise for purchase price. Can you talk a little bit about, multiple offers? Are you even aware of there being multiple offers? Does that really, have any sort of impact on evaluation?
I
Go
will
with
say
what, there's no
it
question. There's just comment.
yeah, I will say it definitely matters. It's an additional data point when we're looking at market conditions, pulling comparables. Obviously, we saw this a lot during the COVID years.
Yeah.
Almost everything had multiple offers, and within hours on the market or days. So it does matter. It's a factor that it's a I guess a function of supply and demand, um, in a sense that the more people interested in a property and the fewer properties available, it's going to drive prices up. Now, in a short window of time, how do we support that increased price? It's really going to be based on what can we support from a pricing standpoint. If all the sales are lower and a property you know has uh, has multiple offers that put it 20% over asking price, well, that's going to lead likely to some issues with meeting contract price. So
Yeah.
it is a factor. We can look at listings. Are the trends going upward overall? Those are all things we have to take into account. And it's a case by case basis as to how what's the result of that appraisal going to be.
Yeah. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's no box or anywhere on the appraisal report that indicates that there were multiple offers. If there is, I don't know where it is.
There's
Um,
not one. We get to add it wherever we see fit. It's painting the picture of what are the conditions at that time surrounding that property and the market as a whole. And there's different places to tell the story. We have addendum all over the place, and free form data or words that we can write in there. But there's not there's not a box for that. There's a supply and demand box, and marketing time box. So when you start seeing undersupply of homes and homes selling 30 days or less, that should be a pretty good indication um, that at least the conditions are there for an increasing market.
yeah. And Scott, you and me probably see and hear that argument being made probably more than anything is, but there were multiple offers. Would you agree?
I would agree on all of those points, and I think that the multiple offers part comes into play with listings and shows the trend of where the value is going, and listings and pending sales. And even though those listings and pending sales aren't as necessarily as weighted or valid as the closed houses, they come into play. And so that providing that data point or having that information available for the appraiser is impactful and sometimes in just a subtle way of knowing the trend of the value. I do think that um, sometimes when people have multiple offers and all of a sudden they took the top offer. One thing I would add in this, and I might not add it in all videos, is that remember we're doing this appraisal for a collateral valuation, and that's important. And most of the weight is significantly related to the closed loans, the closed houses, and whereas the homeowners are looking at the house as a house that they're going to live in for a long time and where they value it personally. And I think that's two different two different things sometimes.
Yeah.
And eventually we have to come back to the baseline that this is an appraisal to determine the collateral value and what we can lend against it. And so that's the balance we're all running, the appraisers running when they're judging this situation. So, and the appraiser, the only thing I would add on that is that remember that the appraiser is very independent. Those are the rules of the game from the industry and have proven to be very good. But at the same time, they're valuing it based on the data and being as medicinal as it can be, but understanding the multiple offers and things like that throw a little bit of subtlety into it that is just not a black and white as you
Answer.
say. It's not
Yeah.
either good or bad. It's just this is a great neighborhood or this is a type of property that's hot right now and that's important and they can go that direction. But at the end of the day, it's still the report that's based on hard data. So
Cool. I'm going to change gears a little bit, and this is probably going to be the majority of our time here, but I want to talk about adjustments. What are the common categories of adjustments that you make? And one thing that I've always wanted to ask is, how do you arrive at those adjustments that are reflective on the pages where the comparables are listed?
Yeah, so most adjustments are going to be made based on, property characteristics. Gross living areas, I would say the most common adjustment made. Um, Bedroom bath count, quality and condition can be adjusted for. Probably less frequently on quality than condition.
Mhm.
Typically, when comps are pulled, in many cases, you're going to try to stay within the same, quality of construction. So, whenever necessary, you can go outside of that, but most of the time, they're going to be similar. Uh, Anything can be adjusted for that can be supported, right? So a location adjustment, if it's necessary, can be adjusted for. Um, the key to all of those adjustments is what is the market reaction to that feature. So if it's a swimming pool, for example, how do we know that it adds X amount of value?
Yeah.
We have to find that somewhere. Typically, that's from other comparables that have a similar feature. Different types of there's plenty of methods for adjusting using matched pairs, depreciated cost, different types of regression. So there's tools out there for appraisers that can help with this. We're not running statistical analysis on every single feature of a home, but the keys are what are the differences? Does the market react to those differences? And if so, what does that contribute to the value of the home?
I,
So you're
I,
not like going to the pool thing. There's not an adjustment that's kind of set, in your handbook. If the pool, if a house has a pool, then you're gonna, then it should be worth X amount more, because it's hard for you to know what the true value and cost of that pool is. All you can go off is the is the value of a home that's recently sold that had a pool versus one that is similar without one.
Right. It's all relative to the market that the property's in as well. So different price ranges. There's different quality of swimming pools that cost different amounts of money. Some markets probably don't command a premium for a swimming pool, where others, it's difficult to sell a house without a pool. We think Florida, so the market you're in matters as much as the actual amenity, I would say.
I
Yeah.
think let me chip in one thing on the grid part of the report is I do think that um, the comparable selection is an important part of the appraiser's process. And ideally, the appraiser would like to have comparables that looked identical to the subject and sold closed yesterday. And then from there, you began to go out further, go a block away, go a street away, a house a little bigger, a little smaller, a house with a pool, brick, not brick. And those are the items that come out just because all houses are not the same. And so the appraiser is trying to pick some that have the, quite frankly, end up with the ones that have the least adjustments, the ones that are just most similar to the subjects. And so those things are important because, for example, and the easiest example to throw in would be um, it's oftentimes or more often the appraiser needs to be picking comparables if they could, ideally, that are in the exact same neighborhood. And sometimes that works out because they're available and they've been sold within the last 6 months, and sometimes they're not available. And that's when the appraiser has to go out a little longer, just time wise or distance wise, to choose something differently. And similarly, when you go to condominiums and townhouse projects, those townhouses and those condos in that same project ideally are the ones that are going to be used for the report.
Yeah.
Again, ideally if they're available. And if they're not, they're not. But if they are, then that minimizes the amount of adjustments that really end up having to be on the grid in the first place. And that's the process I think that you can look, a realtor can look at as well and understand the what that appraiser is going to be looking for. First off is what's in the neighborhood, what's in the project, what's in this area close and similar to my subject, so that we don't have to worry about what the grids are. And
Yeah.
then you get into the grid factor, and then becomes a little bit of difficulty to sometimes understand why is this adjusted this much or that much, and you're able to avoid that as best you can.
So I want to get like going a little deeper with this and the adjustments. And there's obviously all the adjustments kind of fun. I don't know whether I would say they funnel down but they kind of, churn into the net and gross adjustments at the bottom of each comparable. And those are very important. I did not most recently realize, the importance of those adjustments. And that basically tells you how close one home is or the subject is to this particular comp. And the higher the adjustments, well, that, you start getting into double digit, whether it's net or gross adjustments. And that basically tells somebody that these homes aren't as similar as something that would have adjustments with like a single number, an adjustment of like a 5%. Matt, go into like with the net and the gross adjustments and, kind of how those play into the bottom line number, right? Because that's the most important thing. And talk to us about how those adjustments are weighted in a report.
Sure. Yeah, I always like to tell people that, appraising is equal part art and science, right? And to Scott's point, yeah, in an ideal world, all the comps are right on the same street and they look the same and there's no adjustments. But then if that were the case, we wouldn't really be needed either. So
Yeah.
the adjustments, the gross and net adjustments, that's really measuring the similarity of the comparable to the subject. So the more adjustments you have, the more dissimilar it is. If you have, think a cookie cutter situation, if you have a model match that's the same floor plan, everything's the same, you should have zero gross and net adjustments on that property. That would indicate it's the exact same house. Obviously, there's different, even within that, there can be differences. The month it's sold might be different. The people involved are different. There's still differences, even so it may not be the same exact price. But if you have a property that has 30% adjustments versus one that has 5% adjustments, they shouldn't be weighted the same. One is
Yeah.
much more similar. So there are thresholds for Fannie Mae that at least used to be in place. I'm not sure if they still are, but there are lender overlays that still follow these guidelines that 15% net and 20% gross or 25% gross adjustments sort of send up a red flag that
Yeah.
why is this comparable used?
That's usually where you're going to get an underwriter saying, why did you use this comparable?
Correct. And it doesn't mean we can't use it. We just have to comment on why it was used. A lot of times those come from properties that, if we're more unique properties tend to have higher adjustment percentages. If you're on acreage or it's a basement home, bigger variances in amenities and living area and things like that. So those naturally raise those adjustment percentages. So the more complex an appraisal or a property, you tend to see, more of those properties with higher adjustment percentages. And then as far as the weighting goes, it's a case by case basis. What's the problem we're looking at? Where's the property we're looking at? What are the quality of the comparables we have? And then we're looking at, the adjusted range of these sales, and then potentially, looking at listings as well to figure out trends. And then we're really deciding, how much weight does each of these hold? And then as a result of that, it leads to an opinion, from the appraiser of what the value, likely should be.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I've gotten it several times where, a real estate agent will tell me, well, he should have used this comp or, but the comp that they wanted us to use would have been, the adjustments would have been like 30%. And it's like the adjustments are too high. It's
Right.
like it's just going to get thrown out, or an underwriter's just going to question it, or it would just have so little weight or influence on the report. But yet the real estate agent wants it to hold the most weight, which can be frustrating, for us as lenders, and of course you guys too. We see that argument a lot.
I do think Matt can talk to this, of course, better than I can, but Matt has his percentages of weighted comparables in his report. It's very defined and says at the back of it, 25% this one, 20% this one, and those sorts of things. A lot of appraisers don't have that in their reports, or they may just have a generic, all comparables were weighted similarly, except for Comp 4, which was chosen outside the neighborhood to bracket the sales price or something like that. They may have a generic statement like that. So sometimes that's not written in the report. But I do think that a real estate agent or anybody else, and anybody looking at their report, borrowers too, can look to those percentages at the bottom and determine that those probably did carry more weight than the other ones.
Matt, where do you typically put that? Like if I had an appraisal, everybody's probably different, but where would you put that in the appraisal report for our audience?
Mine goes in an addendum. So typically in the sales comparison, underneath the grid, we have some kind of basic comments there, and it points you to a longer addendum that goes much more in depth as far as the different market conditions and adjustments, why they were or were not made, and then the weighting tool that we use that breaks down the actual percentage given to each comparable and what dollar amount that equates to.
So now I want to, ask a question, a term that I've, have been familiar with, but was taught this term is bracketing. One of the things that you guys look for as appraisers is you look to bracket a value, which is very important. You can't just use the highest dollar amount, in homes that have sold. So Matt, give us a little detail on bracketing, what it is, and what you guys are typically looking for to bracket a value.
Sure. Yeah. This is actually comes from the lender side, typically, and lender guidelines that they want to make sure that there's market acceptance for not only the sales price, but characteristics of a property. So we can't just pick all really big homes and adjust them down to fit our smaller subject. We want a property ideally either the same size or smaller,
Mm-hmm.
a property either the same size or larger. That way, as we're making adjustments, we're kind of encapsulating both sides, right? So we're not making across the board adjustments all in one direction. Same with price. You want something that's sold for less and want something that's sold for more. Again, that's showing that the market is acceptable. These prices are acceptable to a particular market, and that we're not pulling things from a superior or inferior market in order to meet a contract price or some for unforeseen price that isn't realistic or supportable.
Scott, anything about bracketing?
Yeah, I think that the oftentimes that comes up in a question because all of a sudden a comparable for will be uh, not on the in the whole of the property. The comparable for may not be a good matchup for the subject,
Mm-hmm.
and so the borrower and the real estate agent will look at that and say, "Look at that comparable number four they used, and it went way over here." And the response from us and the lender when we look at it, and the response from the appraiser will be, well, that was just bracketing, but that only carried 10% of the weight or a small portion of the weight, and it was used for this purpose only. And that comes up so often on those difficult appraisals.
Yeah.
Just that comment is, why did the appraiser use that one? And that's a really good point of why they use it. But I do think that sometimes and that's a way to flip back into a discussion about weighting of the comparables, and that's always the question that the agent or the borrower should be asking when they see a report like that is, why would they use one 3 miles away when there was one right next door? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and that comes into play a lot with unique features as well. So, if you think of rural property that has a horse barn, we need to find something else that has a similar amenity. So sometimes it's not an ideal comparable, but we're looking to bracket this particular feature so that we can justify, whatever value we deem that adds to a property.
Yeah.
That does bring up one subject that it's hard to describe, but when an appraiser is charged of doing a report, one of the things that they always know in the back of their head, because they've heard this a lot, is you can't make across the board adjustments, which means that you can't make if the subject has a pool and every comparable in the report doesn't have a pool, then there's an adjustment for that pool across the board. And that is something that will come back in for the underwriters to look at and say, we can't accept that. You've got to have another comparable in here to justify the market for that pool. And those across the board adjustments can be swimming pools. It could be um, uh, some kind of significant outdoor patio area. They can be anything, and it could be something less unique. But at the same time, that's why sometimes that other comparable is in there as well.
Great point. Great point. So I want to get and ask some questions about some unique features. And I'll start with kind of one that we don't see a ton around here, but maybe we see a little bit more of this around the lake where properties are built on slopes. A lot of times we'll get, some people that disagree with the value because of an unfinished basement versus a finished basement. Um, you know, where it opens up on one side, downstairs, and it was a basement, yeah, but yet somebody finished it, and now you've got heated square footage down there. Matt, talk to us about just the difference there with how a basement or a finished basement is not really the same as that of something that's above grade, and some of the issues you see with having to do appraisals on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the toughest topics I think in appraising, um, from my experience, because it's often misrepresented. Um, Basement homes do add value, or basements do add value to homes. A lot of times they think we don't give it any value.
Yeah.
Sometimes people just blanket statements say it's only 50% or whatever, and none of that's necessarily true. Um, Again, we have to derive that from the market. So the only way to do that is to find other basement homes to compare to. So one of the biggest issues I see from time to time is when pricing a property, a lot of times agents will take the total heated living area and just kind of extrapolate that to the comparable to the market and say, all these homes in this market sold for, $200 a square foot, and they just use the above and the below grade
Yeah.
area. And
Yeah.
and it's, unfortunately they're not apples to apples.
Yep. Not the
And it's not
same.
because appraisers don't think they're apples to apples. It's the market doesn't react the same way to basement square footage as it does above grade square footage. So, and every market could be different. A basement could have a different value in, one county versus another, or like you said, lake property, it's going to be probably higher than, on a farm or, in the rural areas. So, anything that per Fannie Mae and ANSI measuring guidelines, anything that's any portion of that level is below grade, we must consider that basement. So think like lower level of a split level home. Typically, those are going to be basement. Anything that's on a slope where the front's behind dirt and the back's walkout, we have to consider it below grade basement area. Um, Valuing those, typically on the sales grid, most people will notice that only their above grade areas listed in the room count and the square footage. And then you go down a line or two, and then there's your basement square footage, finished and unfinished area, and then what
Hmm.
rooms are down there. So they're two separate entities at that point. So again, the best way to handle that is to try to find the most similar homes, which would also be basement homes. It's really difficult to compare above grade square footage to below grade square footage without having that similar comparison.
That's a good example where it's really important. The goal of the appraiser is to find one that matches, that already has a finished basement. So they look identical and they don't have to worry about what's the fair adjustment. At the end of the day, there's two parts that I always remind everybody. The appraiser is valuing the square footage of the home. There's the above grade, which is the general GLA, and they are giving a value to your basement, and that's another 1,200 square feet, and it's finished. The quality of the finish is important, but it's important as it is defined by the marketplace. And so oftentimes you'll have a finished basement that's just exactly like the upstairs. And that does get more value. It doesn't get the same value, but it certainly does get reflected in there. Whereas on another occasion, you have a basement that's just a finished basement, but it's not of the same quality of the rest of the house. It's a game room. You got a ping pong table. It's a place where people hang out. It's not the same quality. And that is just going to be reflected in the valuation of it. So you're going to get good value for your um, below grade property just based on the marketplace, but also on its finished. And and the issue is not did you get value, but good value, but just how much you felt it was versus somebody else's, and that comes out as defined by the marketplace. So it's
So let me ask this. Let's just say I've got a property in South Charlotte. There's not a lot of other houses with basements around me. I've got some money that I want to put into my basement to make a really cool man cave out of. Going to do some really nice finishes, bar. Maybe there's even a bedroom down there that I want to finish out. How am I getting the highest value for that below grade addition?
Yeah, I would say the highest value is going to come from just making it, as uh, functionally and as like seamless as possible from the upstairs. You don't want to over improve it. I would try to make it as, again, like it's contiguous from the upstairs to the downstairs and usable space as
But
that.
I'm definitely not getting dollar for dollar from up to down, right?
I mean, I would say that it's not impossible.
Okay.
I try to stay away from always and never in
Yeah, yeah,
appraising.
that's fair.
You never know because some markets it might be just as valuable as the upstairs. Again, back to your example of a lakefront home. I've seen lakefront homes with the kitchen in the basement and the master bedroom or the primary bedroom in the basement area, and there's
Very nice.
one or two bedrooms upstairs. So
Yeah.
it's almost like a flip floor plan. So it depends on your market. It depends on the specific property, and then the type of properties around it.
Yeah, I do think that's true. When you get to the lakes, a lot of times the below grade, when it's finished off just like the rest of the house, so many houses have the slope and have that plenty of comparables to match up to that, and so you're getting good value for it. I do think that within the city, I just personally rarely see ever 100% the same value of the above grade as below grade. So and if there was a range, I'm making up a number, but it might be 50%, 50%, so that 50% of the same as the above, or 75% if it's really high quality. So once again, what Matt said is right. Finish it the way you want it, finish it as nice as you want it. He's going to find comparables that look similar to it and try to get the matchup. And that's it's going to vary depending on what part of the city or what part of the area the how property is going to be at.
So I'm going to stay kind of in this same neighborhood, but let's go to upgrades and some renovations. And I think all three of us have come across people that try to make arguments over the fact that the house has a new roof or they just installed new windows. Um, the kitchen was refinished and they used marble instead of granite. Things like that. What Talk to me about roof and windows and various things that have been upgraded. I mean, I've always told people, give the appraiser as much data as you can. If you did put windows in, give them, if you've got a quote from or the invoice from the Windows installation, provide it. But what talk to me about these things that may or may not hold or be difficult for you to give a value to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing I ask before ever leaving a property when there's a homeowner or an agent there is let's talk about all the upgrades you've done within the last looking typically time blocks 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or 11 to 15 years ago. So we'll make note of HVAC replacement, windows, roofs, kitchen bath renovations, flooring, paint. We want to know what's the overall picture of this house as it sits today. That's going towards the overall quality and condition of the home, the effective age of the home, depreciation, and like the cost approach. All of these things combine to give you an idea of what is this property like at this moment in time. The issue with that is we don't necessarily know what the comparables have all the time. So we can't do line for line adjustments for every item. We can't do a line adjustment for a kitchen renovation or for a roof, because we're taking the subject property as it sits and trying to compare it with properties in the market that are as similar as possible and see what the market reaction was to those properties. So, what it ends up inevitably happening is we have a range of values. We may have three great comparables, and there might be a 10% difference between the top and the bottom one, and they all look very similar. So we're trying to extrapolate what is the subject, where does it lie within that range, and taking into account all of those items, right? But again, we can't make an adjustment for each thing.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Scott,
I know you've got some comments on this.
I do think that one thing, just as a caveat to people when they do a lot of renovations, is sometimes they're calling it a renovation and sometimes it's just an update and sometimes it's a repair. But there is some assumption that the home is functional. The air conditioner system works, the roof has life to it. The wiring was good, even though they say they replaced a lot of the wiring. So there's some assumption of functionality with that. And so you may have a list of things that were important to be done to that home to bring it up to speed because of different reasons. and those are of value, but they're certainly not dollar for dollar value.
Yeah.
And that comes into play versus when somebody adds square footage to a home, or where they've totally redone the kitchen and the bathrooms to where they've just spent $100,000 on those. It's just different than replacing the HVAC or fixing the roof. Even though all parts are important, the market reflects it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a difference between like you said, depreciating mechanicals and like a aesthetic renovation or something like that. And back to the dollar for dollar comment, it can be more than dollar for dollar. There's nothing that says it can't be. If somebody renovates, does a high-end renovation of a property that's revitalizing, maybe they get higher than a dollar for dollar return on their repairs.
Okay.
If that market will bear that. But that's not always the case. And typically with maintenance type of things, that's usually not the case.
Yeah. Talk to me about time adjustments. And those are things that I think as we hopefully are starting to come out of a slower market, I have seen time adjustments. I've seen fewer lately. And I think this could be something that appraisers are not able to do like they have in the past, that could be a little bit of a take some getting used to. But when will you add a time adjustment based on a home appreciate the market appreciation versus not being able to put in a time adjustment?
Right. Time adjustments can be difficult sometimes. We have to make sure that it's the time, since the sale of the comparables or whatever, and not something else. Make sure it's not a quality or a condition thing, or something else. We have to be able to show that that market is actually increasing at a rate that is high enough of a threshold to know that these trends are across the board for that particular property type in that market. Um, if you think like the extreme example of this is during the early times of COVID, where we were seeing 20, 30, 40% appreciation, which was just insane, but it was very obvious, right? It was easy to make time adjustments. The amount sometimes may be arguable, but it was obvious that they needed it. Whereas now we're in much more of a stable market. Um, most people probably have not done time adjustments over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Yep.
As it's sort of a function again of supply and demand, probably interest rates are factoring in. So, if we start seeing those market conditions changing to an increasing market again, it's likely you'll start seeing that again. But
You may call it stable. I call it slow.
well, from a price perspective,
Yeah, right,
I'm
right.
calling it stable.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of activity for sure.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so we can make time adjustments whenever we see necessary as long as it's supportable.
I would say one thing back to that, selection and comparability. What you want is the home to comparables to be able to use that sold last month or the month before, certainly within 90 days, so that the time adjustments, while they may or may not be justifiable, are not near as important as the when you're up close and you have comparables that are sold in a time frame that's close to your subject. Um, and when you say times are slow and so there just aren't any comparables, but let's take a sale that was from last December and do a time adjustment. That doesn't those two things don't resonate necessarily. They could be because of lack of inventory, but that's just not that report is challenged just in and of itself because you've got a property that's selling now. There's no comparables in the last 3 or 4 months that have sold that can be used to even kind of create some kind of trend. And so once again, you go back to the selection of comparables. And once you start having to reach out and say, oh, I don't have any sold since March or April or February, then you get into the frustration of, well, why won't there be a time adjustment? And it becomes very tough. And the marketplace, to your point, there's been very few time adjustments over the last year. I don't know if it's 18 months exactly. Matt would know better than I would. Very rare that there were time adjustments that had any impact, significant impact on the reports that I've seen.
Perfect.
By across the board appraisers. It wasn't necessarily one did time adjustments and one didn't. It was just didn't exist.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and they can vary. There can be micro markets in a larger market that may need it, whereas the general market might be still pretty stable or not appreciating very much. And then, a smaller sub market, maybe, you know, just as hot as it's always been.
Yeah.
All right.
So this has been wonderful, guys, and I want to try to wrap this up. But before we go, and for anybody out there, if you've got some sort of technical question that you'd like for me to ask, whether it's Matt or another appraiser, please let me know. Shoot me an email, give me a call, let me know, and I'll take care of that. Maybe we can have that on the next appraiser interview series. But Matt, tell us before we leave. Um, Obviously, I would hope and think that if a real estate agent has something that they're a little concerned that it may not appraise, what sort of stuff do you welcome from whether it be the seller's agent or the buyer's agent that would help support the value? And how do you like that? How do you like for that to be communicated?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to all information that's available, right? That's kind of our job, is to analyze all the data. So if an agent, that's either a listing agent or a buyer's agent, has pulled CMAs or they have comparables that they've looked at, and I'm happy to analyze those. We often see it left at the property or via email. So I'm super open to that. I appreciate the time that they put into putting stuff together.
Mhm.
So I feel obligated to at least you know give it
Take
a
it, look
once
at it.
over and look at it, and maybe they've seen something I haven't.
Yeah,
A lot of times, even with some of these smaller markets and stuff like that, they may know about off-market properties or off-market listings or sales that may not even be listed on the MLS that we can potentially analyze,
yeah, good point.
that we would have never known about. So
I would
those
say
Yeah,
those can be super
one
helpful.
last throw in is pending sales. Pending sales can really be impactful. They're current, they're closing soon, and those are the things that sometimes real estate agent can help provide some insight of when it's closing and anything about the sale that the appraiser can really understand, because that's about as current as you can get.
yeah. All right, one last question, and this is going to be more on something didn't appraise, right? We've all had that happen. But when something doesn't appraise, the review of value, what sort of information? I know a lot of times a real estate agent likes to, and this is what, it's how they have to do it. But, we get, as loan officers, we get an earful or an email full of, all sort of, all sorts of different data that they disagree with. But what is the best way to kind of enter into or ask for a review of value?
Yeah, everything has to go through the lender at this point. I think there's been some changes to that, but they have to provide, if they want to dispute a value, they have to provide specific comparable sales, not just we want you to look at this again kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be specific sales. Obviously, we will go back and reanalyze those or analyze those if they're new properties, and determine whether um, they're relevant to the appraisal. Include them if they are, and if not, explain why they're not. Um, and just to keep in mind too, just a higher appraisal is not always a better appraisal. um, it doesn't mean it's better supported. Everybody hates to see a low number, but sometimes that's the proper number. So, of course, when they want to have a reconsideration, we take all that into account. We have to review that information and provide reasons. Either change the value if you know it's possible an appraiser made a mistake and they missed something that was relevant. I have seen the value change, um, but if they're not, then we need to explain why they're not.
Okay, perfect. Um, Mr. Jones, anything on our end that we want to share regarding, agents that we work with that may want to submit or, review a value?
In terms of tips or the the real estate agents helping to support the ROV.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the pending sales are very important, and also if they know anything particular or they were involved coincidentally of any of the comparables, any insight into the comparables, whether that's interior finish or wherever it might be, because the appraiser's taking the information straight out of the MLS, and everybody can see exactly what that says and what it looks like. And they always look at the pictures, and sometimes they're just a luck of the draw that they can provide some insight into the comparables that were better or worse or something like that. So anything that's just not on there, and FSBOs are on the market sometimes, and something sells to somebody without ever making it to market. And you can't always use those comparables for sure,
Right.
but you might as well put the data up there and let the appraiser make that assessment.
That's perfect. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time today. Try to do this again, down the road with a, different set of questions that are maybe a little deeper dives into the appraisal. But really appreciate both your time. Matt, thank you for all the work that you do for us. And Scott, thank you for your time and being willing to be a part of this.
Yeah. Thanks for
All right.
having me.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.